everybody, and welcome to the Millennial Revolt, a independent political talk show that seeks to bring a different narrative than the stale one we have going on right now in the mainstream media. Now, today's big news is Sir John Chilcot's report. He is the head of Britain's Iraq War Inquiry. We're going to be breaking that down, and we're also going to be analyzing Tony Blair's statements, what he said, and we're going to be putting everything into context. So, yeah, let's get right into this.
But the questions for the inquiry were whether it was right and necessary to invade Iraq in March 2003, and whether the UK could and should have been better prepared for what followed. We have concluded that the UK chose to join the invasion of Iraq before the peaceful options for disarmament had been exhausted. Military action at that time was not a last resort. We have also concluded that the judgments about the severity of the threat posed by Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, WMD, were presented with a certainty that was not justified. Despite explicit warnings, the consequences of the invasion were underestimated. The planning and preparations for Iraq after Saddam Hussein were wholly inadequate. The government failed to achieve its stated objectives.
Okay, so the statements made by Sir John Chilcot were extremely damaging to Tony Blair. Basically, to sum up what he is saying, is what we already knew. That they lied about WMDs being in Iraq, which Saddam Hussein did not have. That the UK chose to join into any legal war. That they did not push for all peaceful resolutions, peaceful options. That war was always on the table, basically regime change. And because of this, now you have so much problems in Iraq that there's no way that we can pull out because of the actions of irresponsible leaders. And what astounds me to this day is why Tony Blair and George Bush are not tried at The Hague for war crimes. It's as simple as that. You've admitted in an inquiry that these people lied, that they used faulty information, killing servicemen, men and women, murdering innocent Iraqis, invading a sovereign country, breaking international law, and these people are still running around free. So now we're going to take a look at Tony Blair's statements, and we're going to discuss.
Whether members of our armed forces, the armed forces of other nations, or Iraqis. The intelligence assessments made at the time of going to war turned out to be wrong. The aftermath turned out to be more hostile, protracted, and bloody than ever we imagined. The coalition planned for one set of ground facts and encountered another, and a nation whose people we wanted to set free and secure from the evil of Saddam became instead victim to sectarian terrorism.
Tony Blair's statement right here basically sums up the entire Iraq war. They went to war on faulty information. They lied to the American public as well as people of the UK, saying that Saddam Hussein was a threat to world peace, that he had weapons of mass destruction, he was going to use them in the Western world, and they attacked. And in doing so, they created a failed state. They created more sectarian divide. And it should be noted that before the American invasion in 2003, there was never a suicide bombing in Iraq. We caused all of this. The Western world caused all of these problems. Like, yes, there was problems with Saddam Hussein, and he was an evil person. But the country was still functioning. People had a job. Unemployment wasn't that high. And now you have the Taliban resurgency. You have massive relocation of people moving into Europe now because of the refugee crisis. Basically, it's unlivable in Iraq as well. And you still have American troops there still fighting to this day. It's 2016. It's ridiculous.
It's claimed by some that by removing Saddam we caused the terrorism today in the Middle East, and that it would have been better to have left him in power. I profoundly disagree.
If you look at Iraq alone, not including Afghanistan, you invaded a country that did not even attack us on 9/11. Had nothing to do with us. What happened here was the United States was engaging in regime change. Now, Tony Blair seems to think that Iraq is in a much better place than it was before the invasion in 2003. Now, unemployment in 2003 for Iraqis was at a high. It was 28.10% in 2003, but it's currently still high, and it's set to increase. It's at 16.40%. You have refugee migration from that country at a large scale. You have the Taliban resurgency happening right now. The United States are starting to withdraw troops, but we've seen just this year the government is unable to govern correctly. There's massive corruption. People cannot find jobs. We've seen the Iraqi people invade the Green Line. They broke it down and basically broke into parliament protesting. This has happened this year. Now, before the Americans invaded, led by the United States, with Britain tagging along, it was a fairly livable place. People had cars, roads, and I keep bringing this up, and I want this to be noted, that before the invasion, there was no suicide attacks in Iraq. We did this. What's even more upsetting about all of this, the fact that international law was broken, the fact that you had two major countries, the UK, the United States, lead in this war to invade another sovereign nation, and no one was charged with anything. You've seen the region plunge into chaos. Look what happened in Libya. After the toppling of Muammar Gaddafi, you still have two rival governments fighting for power, even though one is internationally recognized. You have ISIS taking a getting a foothold in Libya. You have Syria. If you want to say that Assad cracked down on his people, although that has been disproven by reports from the United Nations, you have the Americans backing terrorists in Syria to overthrow a legitimate government there. Again, and we keep seeing this regime change pattern play out throughout the region under the guise of humanitarianism and this whole neoliberal interventionist policy that just keeps being perpetrated, no matter what administration is in there, no matter if it's a Democrat or Republican. We see this happening, and we see the UK tagging right along. You've seen it with the vote to bomb Syria. Like, there was no lesson learned from the mistakes of Iraq. And for Tony Blair to say that the world is a better place, that everything is better now, it's just not. You have terrorism is on the rise worldwide. You have massive movements of refugees flowing into Europe, not seen since World War II. It's just insane. It's just insane. Now let's continue.
Saddam was himself a wellspring of terror, a continuing threat to peace and to his own people. If he'd been left in power in 2003, then I believe he would once again have threatened world peace, and when the Arab revolutions of 2011 began, he would have clung to power with the same deadly consequences that we see in the carnage in Syria today.
Tony Blair is saying that because of Saddam Hussein's removal, and if he would have stayed, he would have been a threat to world peace. Now, for me, this is kind of an idiotic statement to be made, because you see the United States and Western leaders invading multiple countries, causing terror, creating terrorists, destroying livelihoods, destroying countries, in this so-called fictional war on terror, and they're creating more problems than they're solving. Now, he's saying that because of Saddam Hussein's removal, that the Iraqi people are better off. Now, in April 30th, 2004, we found out about Abu Ghraib, a prison west of Baghdad, where President Bush had to come out and make a statement saying that he was deeply disgusted by photographs that show American soldiers smiling and laughing, holding the thumbs up as naked Iraqi detainees are forced into sexually abusive and humiliating, positions. Okay? Now, this is what's happening when the Americans are in power. You have illegal black sites going on. You have weapon sales all along the black market. One of the most important factors that we have to take into consideration is the oil. Iraq had oil. And that was something that the United States probably wanted. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. And we continue to make these mistakes. We continue to do this over and over and over and over again. Our neoliberal interventionist policies are continued country after country, are continued year after year, with no end in sight. No end in sight. It's just a long road of death and destruction led by the United States, and Britain tags along.
He used chemical weapons in the war he began with Iran, a war which lasted 7 years with around 1 million casualties.
Pick up on something that Tony Blair said, and I just want to make this abundantly clear if people did not know. The war between Iraq and Iran, the United States had a hand in this. Now, I'm going to give you some context as to what I'm talking about. The Reagan administration secretly decided to provide highly classified intelligence to Iraq in the spring of 1982, more than 2 years earlier than previously disclosed, while also permitting the sale of American-made arms to Baghdad in a successful effort to help President Saddam Hussein avert immediate defeat in the war with Iran, former intelligence and State Department officials said. Now, this is from a New York Times post by Seymour M. Hersh. This was published in January of 1992. Again, I'm going to have links to every article that I quote. The American decision to lend crucial help to Baghdad so early in the 1980 through 88 Iran-Iraq War came after American intelligence agencies warned that Iraq was on the verge of being overrun by Iran, whose army was bolstered the year before by the covert shipment of American-made weapons. Okay? The New York Times and others reported last year that the Reagan administration secretly decided shortly after taking office in January 1981 to allow Israel to ship several $billion worth of American arms and spare parts to Iran. That intervention and the decision to aid Iraq directly in 1982 provided evidence that Washington played a much greater role than previously known in affecting the course of the long and costly Iraq-Iran war. And this intervention also raised questions about the White House often stated insistence in the early 1980s that it was remaining neutral in the Iraq-Iran war. In the end, officials acknowledged American arms, technology, and intelligence helped Iraq avert defeat and eventually grow, with much help from the Soviet Union later, into the regional power that invaded Kuwait in August of 1990, sparking the Persian Gulf War that lasted a year. Okay? So this is not as cut and dry as Tony Blair is making it seem. We also provided the chemical weapons that Saddam Hussein used in the war. Why? Because to this day we still have a problem with Iran after they overthrew the Shah in their revolution. And this should be noted. So basically what we learned from this press conference is that Tony Blair acknowledges that he made a mistake, but he doesn't agree with certain parts of the report. It was very odd, this whole statement. It was very odd. He knows he committed a crime, which is illegal under international law. You invaded a sovereign country, and he should be in prison. Now, unfortunately, we are still making the same mistakes to this day. Our country is still engaged in regime change and this neoliberal policy of humanitarianism plus interventionism. It's just a shame. Well, that's it for my analysis. I will leave a link in the description box if you want to continue to watch the full press conference, the statement that he made. I am the Millennial Revolt, and as always, have a great day, guys.